Have you ever felt invisible in your own home, as if your kids no longer hear you? Maybe you've tried everything to get their attention, but the more you speak, the more distant they seem. Ravi, a father of two, found himself in this exact situation. He had dedicated years of his life to raising his children, sacrificing his own needs and dreams for their well-being. But as his kids entered their teenage years, things changed. His attempts to connect or discipline them felt pointless. His words seemed to fall on deaf ears, and their responses were filled with eye rolls. Sitting alone one evening, he couldn't help but wonder, where did I go wrong? If you can relate to Ravi's struggle, know that you're not alone. Respect in the family can sometimes feel like it slips away unnoticed in the chaos of daily life. But the truth is, it doesn't have to stay that way. By shifting our approach to how we connect, communicate, and show up for our kids, we can rebuild that bridge of respect. If you're ready to learn how to reignite that connection, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more tips on family life and parenting. We'd love to hear from you, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Let's keep the conversation going. Number 1, stop reacting, start reflecting. As parents, we all know how easy it is to get caught up in the heat of the moment. A child's behavior can trigger an immediate emotional response, and before we know it, we're raising our voices or reacting out of frustration. But what if I told you there's a better way? A way that not only helps you stay calm, but also builds a deeper, more respectful relationship with your child? It all starts with a simple but powerful step: pausing. Imagine a situation where your child is misbehaving. Maybe they're refusing to do their homework, talking back, or just being stubborn. It's easy to feel your frustration rise. Your first instinct might be to snap, to react immediately in anger or annoyance. But what if, instead of reacting, you took a moment to pause? That single pause can be a game changer. When you pause, you're giving yourself the opportunity to reflect, to check in with yourself before you respond. You might notice that your child's behavior isn't just about being difficult. It's likely a reaction to something else. Are they tired, hungry, or feeling stressed? Are they acting out because of something that happened at school? Or is it a cry for attention? Sometimes behind the frustration, there's a deeper emotion like fear, insecurity, or confusion. Understanding this is the first step in choosing a better response. Instead of reacting with anger, ask yourself, what's the emotion beneath their behavior? This question invites you to step into your child's shoes for a moment. It's easy to assume they're being difficult on purpose, but the truth is, children often struggle to express their feelings in a clear and calm way. As a parent, you have the power to model how to handle emotions, especially the difficult ones. By choosing to reflect instead of react, you show your child a new way of dealing with emotions that is grounded in understanding and patience. This approach doesn't mean you let your child get away with bad behavior. It doesn't mean being passive or avoiding discipline. It simply means that before jumping to conclusions or punishing in anger, you take a moment to assess the situation. When you do this, you send a powerful message to your child: I am in control of my emotions, and I can choose peace over chaos. This is where respect begins to grow. Respect isn't just about rules or consequences. It's about how you handle difficult situations. Children are keen observers, and they notice when we act out of frustration or anger. If they see us constantly losing our temper, they may lose trust in our ability to guide them. However, when they see us pause, reflect, and then respond with calmness, they learn that they too can handle their emotions in a peaceful way. By choosing calmness over chaos, you also give your child a chance to mirror your behavior. Children often imitate their parents, so when they witness you handling difficult moments with reflection and patience, they're more likely to adopt those same strategies. It's a subtle but powerful lesson in emotional intelligence. In the end, the ability to reflect instead of react doesn't just create a peaceful home, it also builds a foundation of respect that lasts a lifetime. Number 2, set boundaries without battles. Ravi had always believed in the power of calmness. His approach to parenting and handling difficult situations was different from most. One evening, after a particularly tense moment with his teenage daughter, Maya, he realized something. Respect in the home wasn't about laying down the law with force. It was about creating an environment where respect could thrive. He knew he had to find a better way to guide his family, especially when emotions ran high. One night, Maya came home upset, slamming the door behind her. Ravi, noticing the tension, didn't react with frustration or anger like he might have done in the past. Instead, he calmly went to her room, knocked, and then stepped inside. "I can see you're upset," he said softly, "but we don't yell in this house. When you're ready to talk, I'm here." He wasn't angry, just firm in his approach. And most importantly, he wasn't backing down. Over time, this approach became part of the family's routine. Ravi set the tone by making it clear that emotions were normal, but the way they expressed those emotions mattered. He began to say to his children, "In our home, we speak respectfully. If you're angry, it's okay, but take a moment to cool down before we talk." It wasn't a rule, it was a gentle reminder, one that came with understanding and patience. At first, there were some eye rolls and resistance, especially from Maya. She couldn't quite grasp why Ravi was so calm in the face of her storms. But Ravi didn't change his tone or back down. He knew that respect wasn't earned through forceful commands, but through consistency and showing his children how to handle their feelings in a way that didn't disrupt the peace of the home. Slowly, something remarkable started to happen. Maya and her younger brother Liam began to follow the same practice. Instead of shouting when things went wrong, they would take a deep breath, walk away, and return when they were ready to talk. This wasn't immediate. There were still moments of tension, but Ravi could see the shift. The more he modeled the behavior, the more his kids adopted it. What Ravi realized was that boundaries didn't need to come with a battle. Setting them wasn't about being harsh or controlling. It was about offering clarity and holding steady. His approach wasn't about winning an argument or forcing compliance. It was about building a home where people respected each other's space, feelings, and needs. Over time, this became a natural part of their daily lives. Number 3, model what you want to receive. Ravi always believed that respect was something you earned. He thought that as a parent, he deserved respect from his kids simply because he was the adult. But as time went on, he started noticing cracks in his relationship with them. They didn't seem to listen to him the way they used to, and he often found himself frustrated when they didn't take him seriously. At first, Ravi blamed them. They were being disrespectful, he thought, but deep down, he knew there was more to it than that. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with his teenage son, Ravi took a step back to reflect. His son had been trying to explain something important to him, but Ravi had cut him off mid-sentence, dismissing his thoughts as irrelevant. That's when it hit him. He wasn't exactly leading by example. Ravi had always expected his kids to listen to him, but how could they respect his opinions when he didn't even give theirs the time of day? This realization stung, but it also marked the beginning of something important. The next day, Ravi decided to make a change. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he had to start showing respect if he wanted to receive it in return. Instead of interrupting or brushing off his kids' ideas, he made an effort to really listen to them. It wasn't just about hearing their words. It was about understanding where they were coming from. There were moments when he disagreed with what they said, but he learned to hold back his immediate judgment and just acknowledge their feelings. At first, his kids were taken aback. They were so used to their dad dismissing their thoughts that they didn't know how to react when he actually listened. But over time, something incredible started happening. Ravi's son, who used to argue with him at every turn, began to open up more. His daughter, who had often stayed quiet in family discussions, started sharing her opinions without fear of being interrupted. The small, respectful gestures were slowly shifting the dynamic in their home. Ravi noticed that when he gave them space to speak, they began to reciprocate. They started listening to him more attentively, too. His son didn't roll his eyes every time Ravi gave advice. His daughter began asking for his opinion on things, whether it was about school or her future plans. The relationship was evolving into something more meaningful. They were engaging with each other as equals, not just parent and child. But the biggest change wasn't just in how they communicated. It was in how they treated each other as a family. Ravi began to see his children not just as kids who needed to follow his rules, but as individuals with their own thoughts and perspectives. And his kids, in turn, started treating him with more respect, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The mutual understanding was growing stronger each day. Number 4, make connection the priority. Ravi had always believed in the importance of connection when it came to raising his kids. He knew that parenting wasn't just about enforcing rules and setting boundaries. It was about building a relationship, one that was rooted in understanding, respect, and love. For years, he tried to be a father who laid down the law, demanding obedience, enforcing rules. But somehow things never seemed to click. His kids would follow the rules, but it felt like they were just doing it out of obligation, not out of love or respect for him. Then one evening, after another failed attempt to get his children to turn off their phones and pay attention at the dinner table, Ravi had an idea. It wasn't a new rule or lecture he needed. It was time for something different, something that would allow them to truly connect. That's when he decided to try something simple, a weekly no-phones dinner. At first, his kids were skeptical. They had grown so accustomed to being glued to their devices during every meal that the idea of being disconnected for an entire evening seemed strange, even a little rebellious. But Ravi didn't force the idea. He didn't give them a speech about the importance of family time. Instead, he just made it a rule of the house. No phones at the dinner table. Simple. No big expectations, just a chance to sit down and talk. The first few dinners were a bit awkward. They all sat there, unsure of what to do with themselves without their phones. But gradually, as they spent more time together without the distraction of screens, something started to shift. They began to talk, not about school or chores, but about their days, their dreams, their fears. They shared funny stories, laughed about silly moments, and asked each other questions they hadn't thought to ask before. It felt more like a gathering of friends than a formal family dinner. What Ravi noticed was that his children started opening up in ways they hadn't before. Without their phones to distract them, they had space to be real. His son, who was usually quiet and reserved, suddenly started sharing his thoughts on things like his favorite books and what he hoped to do in the future. His daughter, who had always been the life of the party, began sharing deeper, more personal stories about her experiences and struggles at school. As the weeks went on, Ravi realized something remarkable. His kids weren't following the no phones rule because they had to. They were following it because they wanted to. They enjoyed these moments of connection. They valued the chance to bond with each other in a way they hadn't in years. It wasn't just about the rules anymore. It was about the relationship they were building, the understanding they were fostering, and the love they were nurturing. Eventually, Ravi stopped having to remind them about the no-phone rule. It became an unspoken agreement, a shared understanding that dinner time was sacred. The phones stayed off, the conversations flowed, and the laughter filled the room. Ravi realized that by prioritizing connection over rules, he had created a space where his children felt loved and respected, not controlled. And in turn, they began to honor him, not out of duty, but out of genuine love and care. Looking back, Ravi knew that the weekly no-phones dinner wasn't just about taking away distractions. It was about making connection the priority. He had stopped focusing on the rules and instead focused on the relationship. And in doing so, he had created a foundation of trust, respect, and love that would last far longer than any rule ever could. Number 5, praise effort, not just results. Ravi had always been a busy father. Between work and managing household chores, there was never much time to pause and appreciate the little moments that happened every day. But one evening, as he watched his daughter, Maya, play with her younger brother, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. Maya was known for her impatience. She would often snap at her brother when he interrupted her or made a mess while trying to help. But today was different. She sat calmly next to him, gently guiding him through a game they were playing. Whenever he made a mistake, she would smile, show him what to do, and patiently try again. Ravi couldn't help but feel proud, but he also realized something more important. Maya wasn't just playing, she was showing kindness, patience, and maturity. These qualities were more valuable than any grade or trophy she could receive. That evening, as they all sat down to dinner, Ravi decided to tell Maya what he had noticed. He looked at her and said, "I saw how patient you were with your brother today. You didn't lose your temper, even when he made things difficult. That meant a lot to me." Maya looked up, her face lighting up with a smile. Her eyes sparkled, not because of the compliment itself, but because her father had truly seen her. He hadn't praised her for winning a game or for being the best at something. He had praised her for her effort, for her kindness, for who she was in that moment. Maya's reaction was immediate. She sat up straighter, a sense of pride filling her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced often. While everyone around her might praise her for bringing home good grades or excelling in a sport, no one had ever acknowledged the small, everyday efforts that mattered just as much. The fact that her father had noticed those moments made her feel respected, seen, and truly valued. For Ravi, it was a simple yet powerful realization. As a parent, it wasn't enough to focus solely on results. Children need to feel that their efforts, no matter how small, are noticed and appreciated. If you only praise achievements like grades or winning a game, you miss the deeper aspects of their character, their perseverance, their kindness, their ability to try even when things don't go perfectly. Maya's experience with her father's praise had a ripple effect. Over the next few weeks, she became more patient, not just with her brother, but with herself too. When she found herself struggling with homework or facing a challenge, she remembered her father's words, "I see you. I see the effort." And that reminder gave her the strength to keep going, even when things were tough. Ravi knew he couldn't always be there to praise every small moment of growth, but he also understood that his words had power. By acknowledging the effort, he was teaching Maya that it was okay to try, even if the results weren't perfect. After all, what mattered most was that she was seen and appreciated, not for how much she could achieve, but for who she was becoming. Number 6, own your mistakes. Ravi was the kind of father who always prided himself on being calm and collected. He worked hard to set a good example for his kids, balancing his demanding job with the responsibilities of being a parent. But like everyone, he had his moments. One evening after a particularly stressful day at work, things started to unravel at home. His kids were making noise, the house was messy, and his patience, already worn thin, was starting to snap. In a moment of frustration, Ravi raised his voice. The words came out harsher than he intended, and before he could stop himself, he found himself shouting at his kids. The room went silent, and Ravi immediately regretted what he'd just done. He knew this wasn't the way he wanted to respond, but the damage was already done. His kids stared at him, wide-eyed, not understanding what had just happened. Ravi could have brushed it off. He could have ignored the outburst, convinced himself that it was just a one-time slip-up, and hoped everyone would forget about it. But something inside him told him that was the wrong approach. He was their father, their role model. If he didn't own up to his actions, what would they learn? How would they know that it was okay to make mistakes as long as you took responsibility for them? So Ravi did something unexpected. He turned to his kids and said, "I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have yelled like that. I was frustrated, but that's no excuse. It was wrong of me." His voice was calm, but the vulnerability in his words was clear. It wasn't easy. Admitting he was wrong, especially in front of his kids, felt like a punch to his pride. But he knew it was important. His children, initially stunned by the apology, slowly relaxed. They had never seen him admit to being wrong so openly. Most of the time, parents, especially authority figures, try to shield themselves from any kind of fault. But here was Ravi, showing his kids that it was okay to make mistakes, and, even more importantly, that the best way to handle them was by owning up to them. The effect was immediate. His kids didn't hold the incident against him. Instead, they respected him even more. They saw him not as a flawless figure, but as a real person, someone who was willing to face his shortcomings. And that made them trust him more, both as a father and as a leader in their lives. What Ravi didn't realize at the time was that this small act of vulnerability would teach his kids something powerful. By admitting his mistake, he showed them that leadership wasn't about being perfect. It was about being honest, taking responsibility and growing from those mistakes. In the long run, it helped his kids become more comfortable with their own imperfections, knowing that they too could learn from their errors instead of hiding from them. Number 7, stay consistent with consequences. Ravi was a father who, like many parents, faced the daily challenge of managing his kids' behavior. In the beginning, he tried to balance discipline with affection, believing that if he showed enough love, his children would follow the rules. But there was a problem. His kids started testing boundaries, pushing limits, and more often than not, ignoring the rules altogether. It wasn't because they were bad kids. It was because they knew that, at times, Ravi didn't always follow through with the consequences he set. At first, Ravi reacted the same way most parents do. He threatened to take away screen time or stop a favorite activity, but when it came time to enforce it, he would hesitate. The kids would negotiate, plead, or even throw tantrums, and in the heat of the moment, Ravi would cave. He didn't want to make things worse, so he let small things slide. Unfortunately, that only made things worse in the long run. The kids learned they could push boundaries and that Ravi wasn't as serious as he sounded when he spoke. One day, Ravi had enough. He realized that every time he failed to enforce the rules, he was teaching his children something, that the rules didn't really matter. He knew that if he wanted to raise respectful and responsible kids, he needed to change his approach. It wasn't about being harsh or overly strict. It was about consistency. He made a decision. From now on, he would follow through with every consequence, no matter how small or big. Ravi's new approach was surprisingly calm. When a rule was broken, he didn't yell or get angry. He didn't even argue. He simply enforced the consequence he had already stated. If the kids fought over screen time, he would calmly remind them that their time was up. No bargaining, no negotiations, just a quiet, firm action. Sometimes the kids resisted or complained, but Ravi stayed the course, staying composed and showing no signs of wavering. The change didn't happen overnight. At first, Ravi's kids tested him even harder. They would try to get him to change his mind or make exceptions. But Ravi remained consistent. Over time, they began to realize that their dad wasn't playing games anymore. When Ravi said something, he meant it. His consistency made the rules feel real, not just empty words. What Ravi didn't expect was the shift in how his children started behaving. It wasn't just that they learned the consequences of their actions. They began to respect him in a way they hadn't before. They understood that their dad's word was final, and they could no longer get away with ignoring it. This quiet authority didn't create fear, but it built trust. His kids knew that when Ravi said something, he wasn't bluffing, and that reliability gave them a sense of security. In the end, Ravi didn't need to shout or be the bad guy to be an effective parent. His calm consistency spoke louder than any raised voice ever could. His children learned to respect the rules, not because of punishment, but because they trusted that their dad would always follow through. The lesson wasn't just about discipline. It was about building a foundation of respect, understanding, and a sense of safety that came from knowing what to expect. And that, in the long run, made all the difference. Number 8, invest in your own growth. Ravi had always been a dedicated father, but like many, he had put his own growth on the back burner. Life had become a routine: work, family, and the endless to-do lists that seemed to never end. He'd grown tired, worn out, and his energy was spent. His son Arjun was becoming more observant of everything his dad did, and Ravi realized that he hadn't been setting the best example. His habits weren't what they used to be, and it began to weigh on him. One evening, as Ravi sat on the couch after a long day, his son asked, "Dad, why do you always look so tired?" Ravi didn't have an answer. He thought about it for a moment. His exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. He had lost sight of himself, of the man he used to be before the pressures of life took over. He missed that feeling of vitality, of being in control. That night, he made a decision. He was going to invest in himself again. Ravi started by picking up a book. It had been years since he'd read for pleasure, but as he flipped through the pages, something inside him stirred. It was as if his mind was waking up again. The next day, he laced up his sneakers and went for a jog, something he hadn't done in ages. It was hard at first, but he pushed through, feeling the rush of energy that came from moving his body. Slowly, the small changes started to build on each other. He began to eat healthier, went to bed earlier, and set aside time to learn something new every day. Days turned into weeks, and Ravi could feel the transformation. His confidence grew, and his energy levels skyrocketed. But more importantly, he started to notice something else. Arjun was paying attention. At first, it was subtle, a glance at the book he was reading, or a curious look when Ravi took his sneakers out for a run. Then one evening after dinner, Arjun sat down beside him on the couch and said, "Dad, you've changed. You look happy." Ravi didn't need to hear anything more. Those simple words were a reminder that children are always watching. They don't just learn from what you say, but from what you do. Arjun wasn't just noticing his dad's changes. He was starting to model them. The next day, Arjun picked up a book of his own. He even asked if they could start jogging together. It was incredible to see how Ravi's decision to invest in his own growth had sparked a ripple effect in his son's life. Ravi's journey wasn't just about improving his own habits. It was about showing Arjun the power of self-evolution. He understood now that respect wasn't something you demand. It's something you earn through your actions. When your children see you striving to become better, they're inspired to do the same. It's not about perfection, but about consistent effort to grow, evolve, and show up as the best version of yourself. In the end, Ravi realized that his growth wasn't just for him, it was for his family too. When you take the time to invest in yourself, you not only improve your own life, but also create a foundation for those around you to grow. Children need role models, not just in what you say, but in how you live. And through his own evolution, Ravi had become the inspiration he never realized he could be. Ravi's journey didn't start with a grand gesture. It wasn't an instant transformation where everything changed in one dramatic moment. At first, there were doubts. His house still felt a bit distant, his kids' eyes glazing over when he spoke, his words often swallowed by the noise of daily life. It wasn't easy. In fact, it felt like he was fighting an uphill battle, trying to get his family to truly listen, to understand him not just as a father, but as a person. The respect he longed for seemed out of reach, but something in him shifted. Ravi stopped demanding respect in loud, impatient ways. He realized that respect isn't something you can force upon others. It's not about raising your voice or asserting dominance. It's about showing up day after day in small but powerful ways. So he made a choice. Instead of fighting for attention, he decided to earn it, slowly, steadily, and through his actions. He understood that every moment he spent with his family was an opportunity to lead with quiet strength. At first, it felt awkward. He didn't have all the answers, and sometimes he stumbled. But Ravi knew that the key wasn't perfection. It was consistency. Little by little, his actions spoke louder than his words. Instead of demanding respect, he simply showed it. When his kids spoke, he listened, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk. When they made mistakes, he showed patience, offering guidance instead of punishment. The change wasn't instant, but it was real. Slowly, the atmosphere in his home began to shift. The house felt warmer, not just in temperature, but in spirit. His kids weren't just hearing his word, they were understanding them. They were beginning to see him not just as a father, but as someone who valued them, who respected their thoughts and feelings. And in return, they started respecting him, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. The power of this quiet strength was in its subtlety. Ravi didn't need to make a big spectacle to prove his worth. He realized that true authority is never loud. It's steady and rooted in real connections. It's about showing your family that you believe in them, even when they don't always get it right. It's about setting the example of what respect looks like through your own behavior. As the months passed, Ravi found that his family began to change too. They were more open, more understanding. Conversations flowed without the tension that once filled the room. His kids began to trust him more, to confide in him, and they started to see his decisions through a different lens. They didn't just listen, they heard him. They felt the respect that he had quietly built, one moment at a time. In the end, Ravi didn't need to demand authority to gain it. He understood that respect isn't something you take by force. It's something you invite into your life through your actions, your choices, and the way you show up. It starts with you, and it's never too late to begin.